Hello, welcome back to another episode of Echoes of Evidence. In today's episode, we are going to be discussing science leadership in Africa, redefining science leadership in Africa. And with me today, I have a very distinguished professor who is the best person, I think, to have this conversation with today, Professor Sam Kinyanjui. And I will introduce him in detail, but I will allow him to also say something about himself. And my co-host today is a new face, but I would love to welcome her to the set. Welcome Linda Murungi, who is stepping Evelyn Gitau, who I usually co-host this podcast with. So Samuel, allow me to say a little bit of introduction about you, and I'm going to read it just so I don't mess things up. So Professor Sam Kinyanjui is Head of Training and Capacity Building at the KEMRI Wellcome Trust program in Kenya, and also the Director of the Initiative to Develop African Research Leaders, IDEAL. So who better to speak to this topic than Sam? Welcome, Sam.
Thank you so much.
And you can say hello to our audience.
Hello, everybody. And let me first start by saying thank you very much to Lillian and Linda for hosting me. It's a real pleasure. It's a topic that is very close to my heart. And so I'm really excited and looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Awesome. When we thought about a conversation we'd have with you, Sam, we said, there's nothing else we can speak to you about in the science world, at least from where I sit, than research leadership or science leadership on the continent. And we're going to be talking about something to do with redefining what this really is. So before we get there, I would like you to let us know, if you were speaking to, let me say, a 14 or 17-year-old, how would you define research or science leadership?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So typically, we tend to think of science leadership as someone with a lot of publications, has done a lot of science. But I would say science leadership are people who can lead the scientific agenda. So, for example, if it's Africa, people who will lead the scientific agenda for Africa, people who will say, what are the priorities? What questions should we be answering? And how should we be answering them? So that they generate high quality evidence, but that evidence is relevant to Africa. So in simple terms, is having Africans leading the priority, the agenda for science in Africa.
Great. Thank you, Sam, and very interesting insights. So when you talked about research and agenda, you began to lose me as a 14-year-old girl, but then you have actually explained it really well. So maybe just tell us about your journey, what first drew you into science, and when did you realize that leadership would be part of this journey?
Okay. Thanks. So I first since secondary school, I took science subjects, and I didn't just take them because I could do them well. I took them because I had a really keen interest in understanding natural phenomena, whether it's in biology, physics, chemistry. And for me, I've always had that curiosity. So that's the first part, where it's not even about producing a product X or a product Y, just that natural curiosity. And then building onto that natural curiosity, I then loaded on top the interest for solving challenges that I was seeing around in Africa, particularly, diseases. Of course, health has been a big challenge for Africa for a long time. So in university, I took zoology major, which then introduced me to all the different aspects of
What is zoology?
I was about to tell you what zoology is. In the simplest terms, it's the study of animals, the biology of animals, which includes human beings. And so you're looking to understand how their bodies work and how they interact with the environment, what sometimes it's called ecology. You are looking to understand how, for example, diseases infect and the biology that goes on between the human being and the germs, if I may call them in general germs. And so when I finished, actually, even during my undergraduate, I was lucky enough to do a project. You have heard of schistosomiasis, what they call bilharzia. It is an infection that it's a worm that actually lives in the liver and sometimes the bladder and causes, bloody urine and other symptoms. And it's quite actually common, especially in the coastal region of Kenya and other parts. And I did a project trying to understand how we can develop vaccines to schistosoma worms. And then I was lucky, as I was finishing, to be recruited at the KEMRI, what was the Wellcome laboratories then. So Wellcome, as some people might know, others may not know, is a foundation that was built upon some of the earnings that Sir Henry Wellcome, who was the founder of Wellcome Pharmaceutics, which later got bought off by by Glaxo and then SmithKline, and it's now GSK. But Wellcome Foundation was set up purely as a charity to promote health research in animals and in humans. So I got a chance to work with the Wellcome laboratories, and the first 2 years just trying to understand, to develop new malaria drugs. But my interest was more in understanding how the body fights disease, what in technical term we call immunology. And so I went down to Kilifi on the coast of Kenya, where Professor Kevin Marsh and a number of other people from Oxford had just set up a program in collaboration with KEMRI and funded by the Wellcome Trust. And so I did my PhD there, trying to understand the immunity to malaria. And now this is where, during this period of doing PhD, I became very much aware of how little representation there was in that area and in a lot of health research of Africans researching into African diseases. So in those days, and this has changed a lot, I'm sure we'll come to this discussion later on, you would go for a malaria meeting that has 2 Africans and 50 non-African people. And I'm not saying it's wrong for non-Africans to do research on malaria, which is an African problem. The point is that there should be 50 Africans with those 50 so we want more people doing, but we also want a big representation. So it's not about they shouldn't do, we should do. And so I started really getting aware of how far Africa was lagging behind. And luckily also my supervisor and long-term mentor, Professor Kevin Marsh, who obviously you know through the Science for Africa Foundation and other initiatives he has led, was also very keen. And so we started discussing how can we do capacity building in a systematic manner? How do you generate a research leader? And I'm sure again you may want to delve a bit deeper into this, but essentially it's trying to ask beyond just technical ability. By technical ability, I mean ability to collect data, ability to run an experiment in the lab, ability to go and do interviews if you're in social sciences. What is it that defines a leader? And so that's where I've been really interested. And I guess as we go into conversation, I'll be able to answer some of those, how I've built up to that. And that then shifted me from really being a lab scientist in the lab primarily to working on establishing structures for systematic generation of African research leaders. Yeah.
So, Sam, your journey, as you've described it, it looks very straightforward, like all the right doors opened for you. Is it simply just the curiosity and the opportunities and then the awareness, or were there some challenges that you had to face to get to where you are today?
I mean, overall, let me say this, I've been lucky. And one must always acknowledge serendipity, where things happen to fall in place. Because it's easy to say, well, I work really hard and, this is my whole achievement. So some of them were luck. Some of them, obviously, you have to also put in a lot of hard work as a scientist. And one of the challenges often with science is that there's not a simple direct reward system. You could work for years and find out the path you are following doesn't yield. You know, you had a hypothesis, just to use, for example, pharmacology, or where you're making drugs. People follow, out of every 100 sort of substances, molecules as we call them, they're following, maybe only one or two turn out to become useful drugs. And you can imagine how much you've put in. And in my case, there was a lot of excitement around the development of malaria vaccines. But even to date, as you know, we still haven't managed to develop. There's also the issue of funding. And I've had to have had quite some good amount of funding, particularly from people like the Wellcome Trust and the UK government, UK. But I've also had quite a number of rejections or failure to get funding. And those puts you in a very precarious position because we are dependent on bringing funding. And for example, in some cases, we also have students and you have people working for you who are looking up to you to bring funding so that you can sustain their careers and their jobs and their progression. And so I've had also some of those. And I would say getting funding is really the biggest challenge, and it's often the biggest headache for most scientists. People underestimate how much of a challenge it is. Yeah.
The definition you've given about research leadership.
Yeah.
And you've talked about Professor Kevin Marsh being your mentor.
Yeah.
And Kevin Marsh is, you know, somebody who is so passionate about growing African science and science leaders on the continent. The definition of science leadership or research leaders as perceived in the global north is the same applicable in Africa? Or do those definitions differ?
I would say they have a number of commonalities, but there's also extra for Africans. So I would say the commonalities are, one, you have to be highly competent technically. Whether you're in Europe or in Africa, there isn't a lesser standard. The science you generate has to be the same. And people sometimes confuse when we say that. The quality has to be the same. The focus may not be the same. Or even the level may not be the same. You know, they could be asking much more cutting edge questions because that's where they are at and they have the equipment. We could be asking questions that are slightly before that level, but even those questions has to be asked in a very rigorous manner. So there's no escape from that.
No compromising the excellence.
Yeah. The second part of good science leaders, whether in Africa or in Europe or elsewhere in the world, is that they grow, they mentor and supervise other people and grow the next generation. So for me, a very competent scientist who only cares about doing their own science, producing their own papers, but is not growing other people, is not a good science leader. They may be good scientists, but not necessarily good science leaders. And the third, I think for Africa in particular, which it's not necessarily different for Europe, but I think more important in Africa, is being able to engage with policymakers, being able to engage with communities that are not necessarily as inculcated with science as some of the populations in Europe. I know there has been a shift back even in Europe now and in America, where we've seen a big rise in anti-scientism. Anti-science growth. Sentiments. But in Africa, we have a bigger responsibility to bring down science to the people. Because we are dealing with often where literacy levels are lower, understanding of scientific concepts may be lower. And of course, that is not just for the community. And also, we have a bigger role in advocacy. And again, in Europe and America, they do, but I think in Africa, I have a bigger one, to get our governments to invest um, in science, to get them to really believe that science is an investment that can grow the economy. We also have a bigger challenge because we don't have as much funding sources as Europe and Asia and the developing parts of Asia and America. And so, as a scientific leader, you're having to really also work hard to compete for the little opportunities there are that include Africans.
Yeah.
So if you go to the UK government has a lot of funding for research, in addition to people like Wellcome and others and others.
Yes.
When you come to Africa, most countries don't have government funding for research. So I'm still having to compete with the rest with for international funding. But it means that I also have a responsibility to try and guide the agenda of the international funder on what they should fund in Africa.
That's quite a lot for a science leader in Africa, because and I might have missed some issues, but I'm hearing you say science diplomacy of sorts, advocacy, right?
Yes.
You're talking about mentoring.
Yes.
You're talking about doing the science itself,
Yes.
leading, let's say, research center.
Yeah.
You're talking about mobilizing resources for your science.
Yeah.
Not just locally, but also externally.
Externally, yes.
That seems like quite a bit. It's like I'm imagining that a science leader should be some form of magician. But over to you, Linda.
Yes, and I mean, Lillian, you bring out a really good point. Aspects to do with advocacy and diplomacy, even for those of us who've been in the science world for a very long time, they are not concepts that we have developed over a short time. These are things that you have to continuously be reminded. Please think about communicating about what you do to the people who you need to demonstrate impact. So Sam, maybe just going back to the whole idea of advocacy and diplomacy, what other things do you think we are really strong in as African science leaders, and where are we still pulling below our weight? What would be some of the things that you would focus on?
I mean, in terms of strength, or what you might call opportunities, is obviously we understand our context best. And it's very hard for someone to come from outside and necessarily have the same sense of in-depth understanding of the context. And we have seen, and again, I'm being very careful here, there are a lot of very good international scientists who come to Africa, who have made huge contribution to Africa. But you've also seen challenges of finding that the work they're doing is not contextually relevant or sensitive. Sometimes it's relevant, but not sensitive. And because they don't understand the nuances of the cultures in which they are working. As African scientists, we have that opportunity. And I think you're all familiar with stories like, for example, you have sanitation, and for you, it's quite easy. You go, you dig a pit latrine that you reduce, fecal-borne diseases, and the chief forces people to dig a latrine, and when you go to that household, they'll tell you, we have the chief's latrine, it's there. You go, it's not used.
It's for the chief who told us to dig it.
Yes, and if you don't understand, for example,
you dug it for the chief, literally.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
and there are cultural issues and nuances that you have to understand. In some cultures, a father-in-law can't share a toilet with a daughter-in-law. So once and that is why they had the bush where you go that end of the bush and you go to the other end and the train never meet, and now you're being forced to use one toilet. And so those, I think, are some of the strengths we have, that we have an understanding of the context. And also in many cases, we have lived experiences. And one can underestimate some of the subtle things you understand when you have lived through, which is very hard for someone simply observing from outside. And so that's the second thing. That thing is that if we're generating the evidence ourselves, then our own governments and policymakers are more likely to accept it, because we understand the colonial history And sometimes even well-meaning international researchers with really relevant data are rejected by virtue of being seen to have come within a colonial framework. And you can't come and tell us these things. And they may be very correct and relevant. So the fact that it's us Africans, I think that's where our strength is. The weakness, I think one of our biggest challenge is institutional structures within which the leadership would grow. I think a lot of, and of course, the obvious ones are universities. And if you look at where research leadership or scientific leadership develops in the West and in Asia and in the US, it's in universities. And yet for us, what happens that by the time you finish your PhD, you're already a head of department. Many universities don't have the pipeline that nurtures you into a research leader. What they have is a pipeline that makes you an administrative. So you move PhD, then because now you have done your PhD, you're the head of department, then you're the dean and the registrar. And so we lose a lot of people on this pipeline. So that the pipeline where you move from doing a master's, PhD, postdoc, mid-career, build a research group, it's very rare in a lot of our universities. Granted, again, there are pockets. So again, I'm not doing a blanket generalization, but overall, we are not very strong. Outside probably of South Africa and probably part of the northern African countries, a lot of universities are struggling.
Although some, I would still think it's also a factor of how well equipped these university labs are. So if I want to be a scientist, but I don't have the technology, I don't have the tools to then grow, within that direction. Of course, I have to take the low-hanging fruit with the hope that, we can build now the opportunities to actually do, proceed with this, with the science aspects. And I think it's quite interesting because we have still seen a lot happening over the last decade in terms of technology, AI, and really people appreciating that knowledge generation has really, really evolved over time. So, I mean, what's your view on how best to actually just strengthen the universities? I know you said you had your opportunities in a research institute. That one is just geared towards proper research, as opposed if you're growing your career within a university.
So first, as I said, if I may repeat a bit on that, it's only in Africa where we tend to see that research is only in research institute because but if you go to a lot of other more developed countries where science is vibrant, even those institutes are normally part of a university.
Yes, exactly.
So, the Jenner, which made institute, which made the Chardoc's vaccine is an institute within Oxford University, so the COVID vaccine, the Chardoc's COVID vaccine. So a lot of the institutes themselves are normally embedded within universities. Now, you've brought a very interesting point about the infrastructure, what we would call the tangible hardware. But I think sometimes the challenge is that we start at that end. We say, oh, we can't do good science because we don't have this. But we don't ask, why do we not have these infrastructures? And that is where there's at the core of a really vibrant science ecosystem or a vibrant science ecosystem within institutions, at the core of that has to start with what we call the intangible softwares. I'm borrowing this from a framework from Lucy Gilson and Aragon, and they talk about institutional capacity, talking about tangible hardware, things you can touch, like money, infrastructure, building, people. Then you have the tangible softwares. Softwares are basically your policies, your strategy, document, your whatever. If you go to most universities in Africa, they will have those because it's a requirement for them to be accredited.
Yes.
The challenge is what you call the intangible softwares, the culture, the collaboration, for example. I think for me, things like people work in silos. People are looking over their shoulders of each other rather than working as colleagues.
Yeah.
If you're looking to win these huge grants, the 20 million type grants, you can't do it alone.
Yes, you can't.
But you'll often find people trying to win them alone. They're not working at a departmental level, cross-departmental, cross-disciplinary.
Do you think it's the spirit of competitiveness that characterizes a lot of scientists?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Could that also be one of them?
Yes. And even in Europe and other places, there is competitiveness. So I'm not saying, they are perfectly collegial, but it's understanding.
Yeah.
It's a balance.
Yeah.
Yes, you do need your niche and you do need to be competitive, but your niche can only be so big before you need to, for you to be able to go beyond that point, you have to have other people you're working with. And that sense of where do we want to be as a university? How do we work together? How do we develop joint strategy and then work across departments? More often than not, you'll find if you are in one, and again, I'm not pointing finger to a specific university, but it's a relatively known thing.
Yeah.
You'll find that the medical schools believe they own health research. What is a person in geography trying to do in health research? And even when they have questions that require a social scientist, often they will not. So you'll meet someone who is a clinician or a biomedical scientist like myself, also insisting that they are also going to do focus group discussions and because
interviews,
geomapping of the locality.
Excuse me, social science. So who is social science again? And that is where we fail.
Yeah.
And that is where, when you look at competitive leading universities in the world, they are able to do or to implement or win grants that are large grants. And even simple things like you mentioned the lab. There are equipments that you cannot be funded as an individual. You want an electron microscope. That has to be justified at almost a departmental. We have 5, 6, 7 PIs who are going to use this. Or, these equipment, some of them cost a couple of million pounds.
Yeah, that's correct.
But nobody's going to fund you as an individual
to have that.
And then the equipment that require special rooms with special air conditioning, with special power supplies, that is again not going to be done for you as an individual. It's done at kind of departmental level and it means therefore departments have to come and people have to come and talk together, and then they have to talk to other people across other departments.
You raised some really interesting points, Sam. You've talked about looking at a research leader and saying, if somebody is interested only in growing themselves as an individual, then that is not a research leader or a science leader. And so the aspect of mentorship comes in there. And it kind of took me back to, there's a UNESCO report that I read. It's of course quite old. It's about a decade old. And, they were looking at research leadership in Africa, that pipeline. And it was quite intriguing to see that a lot of sub-Saharan countries have under 50 researchers who are, per million inhabitants. When you compare that to the global average of maybe roughly 1,400, 500, you wonder what is going on the continent. And when you look at certain pockets, you see that North Africa is doing way better than we are, and South Africa. So what is happening in here around sub-Saharan Africa?
I think for me is the intangible part I was talking about is starting to look at science as a key tool and an integral part of all our strategic plans to develop as a continent. I can say this without, what is the word, contradiction or hesitation. I totally believe, and I think history bears it out, no country has really surged ahead without the application of science, technology, and innovation. Now, there are other ways you measure development. You may look at population happiness, you may look at lack of war, peace, and all that. I accept all that. But when you look at, in general, global competitiveness economically, and also how you're able to influence the global agenda, a lot of it is backed by your science, technology, and innovation capacity. And we need to start looking at science in that angle. Science is expensive, and I think
It is.
And we fail to see how much other countries have invested by the time we see the product of this end. You know, we will say things like, oh, does Africa need to invest in theoretical physics, and all this advanced physics, and say, no, Africa doesn't need. And then we are very proud of things like M-Pesa, but M-Pesa only works because we have this.
The phones.
And this phone is a product of a lot of basic research. But basic for the non-scientists means at the fundamental level, where you're trying to understand the molecules, atoms, how they operate, everything. There's a whole research area on making glass that is scratch proof. But those people trying to do glass that is scratch proof are not necessarily saying we are going to solve the world's problem. They're just saying if we have good scratch resistant glass, it will be taken up by different. So that glass, scratch resistant glass, was put on a mobile phone. That mobile phone happens to have come to Africa, and actually Africa has been the biggest beneficiary because we didn't used to have landlines. If you look at M-Pesa or mobile money transactions, again, Africa has been the biggest beneficiary because we were not banked. We didn't have as many banks. So Africa can say, yeah, why should we be investing in this, complicated physics and everything? Well, if you're not ready to do that, then fine. But let's just accept to sit back and wait for other people to make these things for us.
And
then don't complain. Don't complain when don't say there is a mobile phone nationalism or vaccines nationalism or whatever nationalism.
Yeah. Maybe, Lillian, just to reiterate what you've asked around mentorship and building African research leaders or science leaders. Yes, I think some you've talked about, M-Pesa, technology, mobile phones, but just bringing us closer home to the importance of mentorship. You run a very impactful program, and I really like the pyramid that you've developed, where you grow all the way from attachments, school leavers attachments, to internships, then to masters, PhDs, and also accepting the fact that as you go up, there's a lot of attrition. So, and I mean, I'm proud to say that I'm a recipient of of the program, and it has been an investment to so many of us. So congratulations
Thank
again,
you so
Sam.
much.
But just my question is, what causes that attrition, and what qualities would you want to see in an MSc or PhD student that would convince you that this one will become an effective science leader in future? So, if you were to bring a lot of scientists back to the pathway to becoming leaders, what are some of the qualities?
Excellent. And first, you've taken the shot out of my gun. She knows that I will always give an example of how
her being a product.
being a product. And we're also very proud of the people we have grown. Okay, I think so. I'll take two sides of the same coin. There's the student or the person being trained, and then there's the supervisors and the mentors. Because you need that combination. You need good, highly talented people, as you've mentioned. We start with our program Ideal. We have a framework we call Attract, Train, Retain, and Nurture framework, where we are attracting young, talented people into research through attachments. Like we have the school leavers attachment scheme, where they spend 3 months. The top students at the Cliffy County spend 3 months with us, just getting exposure to research. Then we have undergraduate attachment. We have a graduate internship program, which we co-run with Pond University as a postgraduate diploma in health research methods, which is what where Linda essentially started, and then support for masters, PhD, and so on. Now, some of the key things. First, for us, we have an emphasis on three things. One is quality over quantity. It's expensive to train good people. And so you've got to be ready to really be selective. You don't need to feel embarrassed about saying, we are going for the best people.
Yeah.
And the best people are not few. There are loads. For the postgraduate diploma, when we advertise, the cutoff is a B plus in using the Kenya system, a B plus in the secondary school results, and a first class or upper second. And we only received to 2 years. And the last time we had 4,800 applicants.
4,800.
Yes, who met the basic criteria. So
Yeah.
Africa is not lacking in potentially good people.
Yeah.
And so the way we recruit, the issue of recruitment is very key. So transparent, but also competitive. The second one we focus on is equity. And the point of equity, and this way of funding really, even from governments and scholarships and studentships, should really are really key. Equity means that, for example, for us, one of the ways we promote equity is that all our students get funding, as you know. So they will get a stipend. They don't have to pay for anything. Their school fees are paid for. They have a research fund. All their research costs are met, conferences and all that. What that does is that it allows us to recruit from all types of social strata. We can recruit from the poorest part of Africa. Like now, we are working in Niger. We can recruit we can recruit females, we can recruit male, we can recruit across all genders and all that without having them having challenges because of economic support. So that's the second, I think, is very key. Deliberate emphasis and resourcing of the pipeline so that you can draw in the best people regardless of their social strata, whether it's socioeconomic, gender, or religion, or whatever else it is, because that's the only way you will harness the best across the continent.
Yeah.
The third part is having long-term vision. When you get the best people, we need to think in terms of, it's not just a year contract and that's it. It's looking at so by starting, especially with the 1 year one, it allows us to recruit many people, but quickly identify people who look like they are shining. And they're not always necessarily just the people who scored the best in academics. It's people who show interest, people who are curious, people who have the eye to start seeing gaps in research, and they're able to say, look, that's very interesting. If I had money, I would
do that.
try and answer that question. There are people who have a drive, and there are also people who are resilient. They understand the challenges of research. But yeah, so I'm saying then it's how do you grow these people the long term?
Yeah.
So that's on the people side, looking at the best people. When it comes to the other side, is having the good mentorship. And that has been a big challenge in Africa. And as one of my friends likes saying, you learn your bad manners from the bad manners of your supervisor. And then you teach your students
the same.
bad manners.
Yeah.
And again, there's not a single description of what is a good supervisor, but there are some general kind of principles. You have to be interested in your student. Unfortunately, in many cases, because of the way some institutions are structured, universities, you're required to supervise students. So basically, a student is loaded on you, and there isn't
that connection.
Yeah.
Yeah. For those supervision and mentorship,
I will separate the two.
Okay.
Yeah. In some cases, especially at a younger level, sometimes your supervisor is also your mentor.
Yes.
As you mature and progress, you may have a supervisor and also a mentor. So, strictly speaking, they are not complete. You can have a supervisor who is also a mentor, and you can also have a separate mentor. But especially supervisors at the lower level are quite key in shaping the way this person will, first, whether they'll continue in research. I mean, there are people who have such bad experiences with their supervisors that when they're done, they're done. In fact, I'll never come back to. And that number one. Number two, they also develop, for example, if your supervisor didn't really demonstrate care, wasn't bothered about whether you're passing, as long as, they're ticking the box, how they guide you, how they give you feedback, whether it's a feedback that encourages you or whether it's a feedback that destroys you. All those things really matter. And one of the things that, and I think SFA has now also been focusing on, and we are focusing on, is supervisor training. We assume automatically just because someone is a good scientist, they are good supervisors, and it's not automatic. And so it's not that people are necessarily malicious. They're supervising, as we said, the way they were supervised. I've had situations where in other settings where we are talking with students, they say, I meet my supervisor once every 3 months. How do you meet a supervisor once every 3 months? And you ask the supervisor, they say, no, these ones, they should know how to, they are mature, they are adults, they should be able to sort themselves out. So then coming to mentorship. Mentorship is slightly different. As I said, your supervisor could be your mentor, but you would also have a separate mentor. And these are people who are able to see the bigger picture. There are people who can guide you. There are people who can tell you which direction to go. For example, even on our pipeline, as you said, there are people who don't necessarily follow the full pipeline, and we don't see them as failures because they maybe say, I want to go masters, but what I've learned now, I'm interested in going into policy, not necessarily doing academic. That's what mentors are very good for. They're able to guide you career-wise and say, hey, this is how you should think about it. Have you considered this? These are the challenges these are the advantages of this pipeline. I think these are your strengths. So play to your strength and so on. And again, mentorship is the same issue. There are good mentors and bad mentors. And again, it's an area that needs to be trained rather than assumed it's automatic.
I mean, I truly fully agree with you, Sam, because I've had the privilege of having the same mentor since 2006.
Oh, wow.
So 19 years later, and
Is this the same
they're
mentor
still
that I
in
have?
your life. Is it still Sam or somebody else?
Not me.
It is somebody else. A lady who I really envy. And I mean, a lot of the things that Sam has brought up, you have to really be empathetic. You have to be closer to reality. There are some who are mentors, but they paint this bubble that is not the reality. And I think for me, key is also learning through their failures. They make you see that it is not all success. I have also failed. I have struggled. And I think that for me, that has been key to my relationship with my mentor for a very, very long time. So then and you keep enriching each other, as you go along. So I'm glad, Sam, you're really thinking through some of these aspects. And, advocating even for the supervisor training, mentorship training for a lot of, some of the people who will nurture some of the African science leaders.
So Sam, as a science leader who is in the business of training others, building capacity in this area, would you say that science leadership in Africa needs redefining?
I'm not sure what
are we
redefining means.
Because
I'm always wary about these words that start with re.
Reimagining,
leadership, redefining.
I'm looking at it from the fact that there are definitely things that may not necessarily work. Right? You've talked about, for instance, collaboration versus competition. Right? You've talked about leaders who may focus on themselves and not necessarily building, a pipeline to become leaders as well. And there are a couple of other things. You've talked about the competing issues for funding in Africa. And whether the way we are leading, or the way leaders like you are leading in science on the continent, is also a challenge in terms of raising resources nationally or domestically. So there could be things that may not necessarily be working. And I guess that's where I'm thinking about, is there a need to redefine, or are we comfortable with how things are?
I wouldn't say we are comfortable because First for the pudding is in the eating, and you can see Africa is still lagging behind, and we were really exposed. Our failure to invest in science was really exposed during the COVID pandemic.
Yes.
And I know that we were proud to an extent of how Africa coped. But I must say this, and it may be not a very popular position. We were really lucky
Yeah.
that for some reason, biologically, COVID was not as severe in Africans as the case we saw in Europe. Because although people feel angry when you say many Africans would have died and all that, actually, if it was a case that we had the same severity as we saw in Europe, people would have died.
Yeah, totally.
It's not some malicious statement from some people.
Yeah.
It's a fact of life.
Yeah.
And so we need to look back at that, not feel so proud of, we survived and other people were hit really hard, but to say, how are we prepared for the next one? Because the next one may not behave like COVID did. The next one could be really hard on Africa. And I think this is where organizations like Science for Africa Foundation, which have been largely a part of the history of its establishment, and other organizations, and then the African governments, this is why they really need, as you say, to start really taking research and science leadership really seriously. Start investing for simple things like look at universities. Most universities I know don't have a research-rich career pipeline.
That's true.
Your promotion is largely on teaching. And it means that people are very quickly, you finish your PhD in other settings, that period after PhD, what you call the postdoctoral training period, is when people are most productive. And it's where they have very little responsibilities, but also a lot of independence, so they can pursue their ideas. But with us, you're immediately sucked into. And so if you're talking redefining, if I would use
my phrase,
your phrase, I would say that is for me some of the areas where, because then we define academic leaders by virtue of their administrative positions, not by virtue of their scientific development.
There was a very interesting case in Uganda. I'm not sure if you got to hear about it. Jesus, the name slips my mind, but it was one of the I don't know whether she was a doctor in Uganda who had come back after her PhD and really wanted to get into research. And the vice chancellor was actually not for her getting into research. It was a big story in Uganda. I know people in Uganda, you must remember this case. It went up to court, where this doctor was saying, I've gotten my PhD, I want to get into research, I don't just only want to be teaching. And it was such a big issue. So when you talk about this, it's actually, we've seen these things happen.
I mean, very, very interesting, Sam, but I'm just thinking in my mind, what would be a first step towards achieving that? And also reflecting on some of your sentiments around, those intangible assets, something that I've never quite seriously thought about, but they are quite unique assets. So how can we package all this so that we open, a really big door for our universities, our institutions? I know you mentioned funding is a challenge, but those are, the typical things, but more of the atypical ones that, could be low-hanging fruits for us.
I mean, first, let me say this. Universities are very big institutions. Even small universities are still quite a complex institution, and changing them is not always easy. And remember also you have academicians, and we are stubborn because, you know, we know.
You're educated.
Yeah, and
Professor.
we are professor.
Professor.
Yeah. So what are you coming to tell, my friend? Oga, we have been doing these things for a long time.
Well, you just came in yesterday.
Saturday, this young girl.
Yeah.
So, and I think that is one of the areas which is a challenge.
Yeah.
How do you take an institution that has a lot of entrenched
practices
and cultures and kind of start, you know, turning them?
Yeah.
And I think we have a chance with some of the younger universities that are coming up. Let me, for the purpose of this, let me, for example, point out universities that I work with closely. And it's very young, but very responsive, very agile. Pan University, where we have been able to establish together joint master's programs and the postgraduate diploma program together. We are doing quite a lot of research together. And what has enabled that is that there is a very short bureaucracy chain. Basically, you can walk to the university and walk to the vice chancellor's office at a knock. As long as he's free, he will entertain you and listen to you. And I think that, to me, means that we have a chance with some of the younger universities. Now, not in any way to disrespect the older universities.
Yeah.
They are the ones that have produced us. But just to say they have grown old and they're running the risk of, being falsified in their ways because they are old. And the challenge is also sometimes the funders will work with the bigger university by virtue of its historic, rather than working with them because of what they are at this point.
Yeah.
And so I think that one, targeting where there's already ready recipients or the younger universities. The second is funders like SFA, I think, have an opportunity to kind of incentivize. You can't force, but incentives sometimes are very good in changing behavior. So, you know, for example, you say, okay, we are going to have research chairs within the university, but you're only going to fund those chairs if you have a research career pipeline that has been established. That's the only way you're going to get our money. We have national research funds across Africa.
Yes.
They may be called NRF, SANS, whatever. Again, those are good opportunities where NRF says, we will not give you money as individuals. We want to see a research pipeline, research career pipeline in the university, and we will be funding across that pipeline. The Ministry of Education can fund the teaching pipeline because that falls under them. But we are going to fund this research, and we want to see a pipeline that is not just based on one-off funding for people, but a pipeline that is based on how we will fund people and progress them to the next level. So I think some of those are opportunities that we should really take advantage. Funding to influence structures and working with younger universities, or not just younger, let me put it this way, receptive universities, because obviously we have, for example, the University of Ghana, I admire very much. They are an old university, but they're extremely research, intense, and they're really doing well.
So, having had this conversation, I think the person out there who is watching and listening to us might be asking, so how does this matter to me? Why should I be bothered?
That is your mama mboga. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, as I said, or let me put it simply, if they look around themselves, if you look around, now this to the listener, if you look around yourself, you're basically surrounded by outputs of science. Sometimes you don't even realize how much science, technology, and innovation permeates in our lives. Simple things like, if you look at this chair, we are sitting, the cover is plastic.
Yeah.
This is not a natural material. This is a product of science. The that paint is a natural product. Because we tend to see science only in terms of medicine, high-tech products, but we're so impacted by science on a day-to-day basis that people don't even think about it. When people are doing, let me again go back to the use of mobile phones for various services that now even my grandmother in the village uses as though it's normal. But they don't realize how much science has gone into it. The other reason it matters is that other countries are applying science to be ahead of the game, to be ahead of in the world. If we do not do the same thing, we'll be left behind, and what we become are beggars.
Yeah.
We'll basically be waiting for somebody else to build something for us.
Yeah.
We want solutions to our own problems, then they have to be done by us, by the people we have, or have to be led by the people who understand the problem, and that is us. And so building research, African research leaders matter, because ultimately Africa has to develop, or rather have to apply its science to solve its problems.
That's true. That's so true, especially now when you look at the next frontiers that we're looking at. We just touched a little bit on AI. These aspects of a lot of issues around data.
Yeah.
And then we shouldn't forget that when products come from, the West, or, what we call as the developed world,
Yeah.
we still complain because we're still saying, oh, there must be, that's the origin of conspiracies and myths and misconceptions. But if we're not developing our own science leaders, this is what we're going to be grappling with. Other people will be moving ahead of the game, while we will be waiting to be given. And when we're not given, then we complain. So I think it makes a whole lot of sense to just know that the topic around building our own science leaders on the continent is very important. And it just doesn't really apply to the scientists themselves, but even policymakers. The role of policymakers, we haven't touched about that. Can you say something? Where does policy making fit here in terms of ensuring that we're building this muscle?
I think obviously, at the end of the day, whatever evidence we generate as scientists, for it to have an impact in the society, it has to be translated. And it has to be translated into policy, it has to be translated into products, and it has to be translated into practice. And so in the middle of the society and the evidence generating scientist sits the policymaker. And they then become the gatekeepers of how we're able to utilize the science we generate. What that means, therefore, is that the relationship between the scientist and the policymaker is extremely important. But let me also correct a view that I think sometimes is common, and it's the idea that as scientists, we just generate evidence and we give it to the policymaker makes a policy impacts on, and it's not linear at all. First, you have to understand the position of the policymaker. There is already the science issues themselves. For example, just because I have good evidence doesn't mean that's the final evidence. It may need multiple other studies for that evidence eventually, for everybody to say this is unequivocal evidence that this is an important thing. Even then, when you take to the policymaker, remember they have multiple considerations for them to translate the evidence into or formulate policies based on that evidence. There's resources, there's cultural aspects, there's politics. So all those things also feed into whether this evidence will end up in policy. And they have also to respond to the views and perspectives of the society themselves. So there will be evidence that you might come with, and they will struggle with how to formulate it so that it's palatable for the society. What that means essentially is that there's a triangle of scientists, policymakers, and the society, and each of these relationships have to be really nurtured. And I know you have a strong interest in nurturing the scientists and the society, and we have people at SFA who are, people like Ozma, who are interested in nurturing the relationship between
Science and policy.
and policy. Yeah, and then there are people in the policy space whose job is to nurture that relationship and understanding between policymakers and the society. So at the end of the day, the link between us, and we have to develop really good relationships with them, the policymakers.
Yeah. And I mean, I do agree there is a lot of awareness now about the importance of policymakers and, researchers to work together, end to end, not just at the point where, evidence has been generated, but from formulating those questions so that they're also contextually right, as you said, politically correct, and then the uptake will even be smoother once the evidence is generated. So those are very interesting insights.
Yeah, no, totally agree. Yeah.
Your parting shots, Sam.
Sorry?
Your parting shots.
Oh, my parting shot.
Yeah.
As I started by saying, I believe that no country, no region is going to be competitive and go ahead of the game without the application of science, technology, and innovation. But for that to happen, the continent and countries in the continent have to not just commit, but act in terms of putting resources for developing African science leaders. At the end of the day, we must aim, or we must have a vision for African scientists solving African challenges and also global challenges, because Africa is not isolated.
Yeah.
So when we develop those leaders, sometimes they may be working even on global challenges that will have an impact on Africa. So for me, is to just first say thank you very much again to the two of you for inviting me here, but also to Science for Africa Foundation, which I think is doing a really great job in really driving the development of science and science leadership in the continent. And also to thank a lot of the funders who have really made the work of Science for Africa and other initiatives work. For example, the Wellcome Trust, the UK government, EDCTP, Gates Foundation, NIH, and all the other funders. But to say this, all their contribution, no matter how large and no matter how well thought, is not going to solve Africa's problem if the African governments are not going to put money and resources into developing African science.
Where it matters a lot. And that will be the strongest bit for the issues we struggle with around public trust in science.
Yes.
Linda, what are your parting shots as someone who has walked this journey into research leaders, a research leader in your own right? What parting shots would you have?
I think for me is to really be encouraged by how things have changed since, some of us started our training. And also, as some said, the word redefining, how, it's not really redefining. It's we are still on the right track and we are doing the right things. So I think for me, just the conversation and hearing from some that we are doing the right thing, I think is very important. I've learned a lot around intangible assets that we don't really think about. His views around, policymakers, having governments commit funding, how we can actually impact the people in the community, our day-to-day interactions with people who really don't, you find it hard to actually translate what science is, but having to remember that when you're talking to them, even the knife they're using to cut the mboga, even, those machines they're using to issue tickets in buses, that is all science. And that, for me, would be a very good starting point for a conversation around science and the importance of everyone supporting building African science leadership. So I have so many takeaways, and I like the fact that it has been really simplified to things that we can identify to on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you, our audience, for spending this time with us. We hope that you have picked one or two nuggets to take home with you. And for me, I think the key is to know that science is not something abstract. And science leaders are people as ordinary as you and me, as some seated here who also has children, just like you have children. Linda, who is seated in that corner, who is a mother, just like you have mothers. We are all human beings, and whatever we use, even the glass in front of us where we're drinking from, is here because of science and because of science leaders, just like Sam and Linda with us in the room. So thank you again for spending today with us. We will see you in the next one. And until next time, remember to share, remember to subscribe, and remember to like. Let us make science public.